In the sun-drenched village of Nthora, where the red earth met the silver line of the river, a child was born beneath a sky that hummed like a song. Her name was Abony, and from the moment she cried, the winds carried her sound as though it were a prayer. By the time she could walk, her laughter turned into melody, and the elders began to whisper that the Sky Mother had placed a piece of heaven within her throat. People came from distant lands just to hear her sing. Her songs could hush quarrels, mend broken spirits, and even make the goats rest their restless feet. When she sang by the river, the current slowed as if listening. When she sang at funerals, even grief itself seemed to take a breath and soften its edge. Abony's mother, Oma, often said her daughter's voice was a bridge between worlds, between the living and the unseen. The villagers believed her voice could reach the ancestors and call down blessings. And for a time that was true. When drought touched the fields, Abony sang and the clouds returned. When illness spread through the huts, her melody wrapped the sick in comfort until the fever broke. Even the chief of Nthora, a stern man who seldom smiled, would close his eyes when she sang and murmur, "This child carries the sky inside her." But where there is light, shadows always gather. The same voice that healed hearts also awakened envy. Some said no human should sing like that. Others whispered that Abony's gift was witchcraft, that no mortal could summon rain or silence thunder without a dark bargain. The jealous voices grew quietly in corners, in gossip by the wells, in whispers carried by wind. The village's older singers began to avoid her. The drummers complained that her songs made their beats feel dull. And among them all, one woman's heart hardened more than the rest. Abel, the chief's wife, who had once been praised for her beauty and poise but now found herself invisible beside the radiant glow of a young girl's song. Still, Abony remained kind. She would greet Abel with warmth, offering baskets of fruit and small smiles. She sang not for pride but for peace. "The Sky Mother lends her voice through me," she would say. "I only return it to her." Yet those words only deepened the sting in jealous hearts. Abel watched as her husband gifted Abony a necklace carved from river pearls, a token of gratitude. That night, as the chief laughed freely for the first time in months, Abel sat in silence, her nails digging into her palms. Rumors spread that Abony's voice was too powerful, that it was unnatural for one so young to control the moods of spirits. A traveling priest passing through the village declared that voices born from heaven often carried curses when left unchecked. "Such power," he said, "should be contained before it turns against us." His words planted seeds of fear that soon took root. Abony noticed the change. Where once her songs were met with smiles, now she saw wary eyes and half-hearted claps. Mothers began pulling their children away when she passed. The laughter that used to echo after her melodies became uneasy silence. She tried to sing less, but even her quiet hum seemed to unsettle the people. At night, she whispered to the sky, asking why her gift had turned heavy in her hands. Still, when storms came or sickness spread, the villagers would beg her to sing, and her voice, pure as morning light, would save them again. Yet gratitude faded quickly, replaced by fear and envy. The same people who praised her called her cursed once the skies cleared. And far away, in her hut of carved ivory and silk, Abel began to scheme. If she could silence Abony even for a day, perhaps peace, or power, would return to her own life. So, beneath the glow of the moon, as the crickets sang their endless tune, Abel whispered to the shadows, "If her voice truly belongs to the sky, let us see if it can sing from silence." And with that, the air around Nthora grew still, as though even the spirits were waiting to see what envy would demand next. Mama Kira had long been the voice of the unseen world in Nthora. For decades, her chants were the rhythm that guided births, healings, and burials. People once came from neighboring villages to watch her perform rituals under the moon, her painted face glowing with sacred oil, her words rising like smoke into the night. When she spoke, even the elders bowed their heads. But that was before Abony's songs filled the air, before a young girl's melody began to weave more power than her incantations ever had. At first, Mama Kira told herself that the girl's gift was a blessing to the village. She smiled when Abony's songs calmed crying children or called rain to thirsty soil. She even offered small tokens to the girl, dried herbs, bracelets of cowrie shells, pretending to encourage her. But as the seasons changed, so did the people. When sickness struck, they no longer ran to Mama Kira's shrine. They went to Abony's hut. When marriages faltered, women stopped seeking Kira's blessings and instead asked Abony to sing. Even the chief, who once relied on Kira's counsel, now visited the young singer for comfort. Each time Abony's voice rose through the air, the priestess felt something inside her twist, a bitterness sharp and hot. She began to dream of her own chants drowned out by song, of her sacred drums splitting open as Ebony's melody filled the sky. She awoke drenched in sweat, whispering, "The spirits will not be replaced." One afternoon as she sat by her altar surrounded by skulls, bones and jars of river clay, a thought took root, dark and tempting. "No mortal girl should hold such power," she murmured. "If her voice can move heaven and earth, then surely it was not meant for human ears." That evening she went to the council of chiefs, her staff striking the ground with each step. Her eyes gleamed with conviction, and her tone carried the weight of fear wrapped in wisdom. "The girl's songs are not of the Sky Mother," she warned. "They are of something deeper, something that dwells beneath." The chiefs exchanged uneasy glances. One asked, "Mama Kira, what proof do you have of this?" She leaned forward, voice trembling like wind over water. "Proof? Look at the signs. The rains that come too soon, the river that hums with unseen voices, the way people fall into trances when she sings. You think it is healing? I tell you it is binding. She is calling spirits from the underworld and they listen. Fear is a powerful seed and that night, it found fertile ground." The chiefs whispered among themselves. The queen, already jealous of Ebony's growing influence, nodded slowly. "Perhaps the priestess speaks truth," she said. "If the girl's voice can command the elements, what power will she wield when she is grown?" The next morning, Mama Kira gathered her apprentices and performed a divination by the river, a performance meant to convince everyone that darkness indeed followed Ebony's voice. She scattered ash over the water and as the wind blew she gasped dramatically. "See," she cried. "The river rejects her name. It ripples with unrest when she sings." The villagers, already uneasy, murmured among themselves. Ebony, unaware of the storm building around her, continued her humble life, singing as she washed clothes by the river, sharing laughter with children. But eyes followed her now, suspicious, fearful, poisoned by Mama Kira's whispers. Even her closest friends began to avoid her, afraid that the priestess's accusations might be true. At night, Mama Kira stood outside her shrine, looking toward the faint light of Ebony's hut. The soft sound of the girl's humming reached her, gentle and pure. It only deepened the ache inside her. "You think your voice belongs to the sky," she muttered, clutching her charms, "but soon the earth will swallow it whole." And with that vow, she turned toward her altar, feeding the spirits a promise of silence, not knowing that envy, once awakened, is a spirit that never sleeps. The dawn that followed was heavy, thick with unease. The people of Nthora gathered in the village square, drawn by the sound of drums that did not celebrate but accused. Word had spread that Ebony, the girl whose songs once healed and blessed, was to stand trial before the council. The morning air carried whispers, each one sharper than the last. Some murmured that she had bewitched the prince's newborn child into sleep for 3 days. Others claimed the river spirits danced when she sang. The truth was irrelevant now. Fear had already woven its song. Ebony stood in the center of the courtyard, her wrists bound loosely with palm fiber, her eyes wide but calm. Around her, the elders sat in a half-circle, their faces painted with white ash, their gazes uncertain. The villagers pressed close behind them, some with pity, others with morbid curiosity. And at the far end of the courtyard stood Mama Kira, wrapped in red and black cloth, her staff adorned with feathers that trembled in the wind. She raised her chin high, playing the role of divine judge. "People of Nthora," she began, her voice steady and commanding. "For generations, I have guarded the boundary between our world and the world of spirits. But this girl," she thrust her staff toward Ebony, "has crossed that line. Her voice calls powers we cannot see. Powers that do not belong to the living." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Ebony's mother wept softly, clutching a strip of cloth from her daughter's dress. The chief, seated in the center, lifted a hand. "Mama Kira," he said, "you claim her voice is a danger. But this child has healed and helped more than any spirit worker in memory. What proof do we have of darkness?" Mama Kira smiled faintly, a serpent's curve. "The spirits will decide," she said. "Let her sing before the sacred flame. If her voice is pure, it will fade before the fire. But if it is tainted, if it feeds on hidden power, the flame will rise." A tense silence fell. The sacred flame was a living spirit, said to burn only for truth. No one had ever dared use it for judgment. Ebony looked at the flickering fire as it was brought forward, a bowl of glowing embers that seemed to breathe. Her heart thudded, not from guilt but from the weight of being misunderstood. When the chief nodded for her to begin, Ebony closed her eyes and let her breath steady. The crowd leaned forward. Her song started soft, trembling like dawn wind over leaves, a tune of longing and grace. It swelled and the air seemed to shimmer. The flame flickered in rhythm with her melody, rising higher with each note, not in anger but in joy. Its golden light painted her face in warmth, and even the wind seemed to pause to listen. People gasped. "The flame dances," someone whispered. "It rejoices." Ebony finished her song with a final note that hung in the air, sweet and trembling, and the flame burst upward, bright and alive, before settling back into calm. The elders exchanged astonished glances. It was a sign of blessing, an omen that her heart was pure. But Mama Kira stepped forward, her shadow falling across the fire. "Do you not see?" she cried. "The flame grows wild in her presence. It is not joy, it is warning. The fire of the underworld burns hotter when evil is near. Her song feeds it. Her power grows stronger." The crowd wavered, torn between awe and fear. The queen, ever wary of losing control over her people's hearts, seized upon the priestess's words. "We cannot risk it," she said coldly. "No voice, no matter how beautiful, is worth the safety of Nthora." Ebony looked to the chief, to the elders, to the faces she once healed with her music. None met her eyes. Only the wind answered her silence. Tears welled but did not fall. She lifted her chin, voice trembling as she whispered, "My songs were born of love, not darkness. I sang to heal, not to harm. The Sky Mother gave me this voice. Will you now silence her gift?" But her words were swallowed by fear. The verdict was spoken before sunset. The girl with the golden voice was to be silenced, her song sealed forever. Mama Kira's mouth curled in triumph as she traced a circle of ash around Ebony, murmuring the ritual of suppression. "Your voice has wandered where it should not," she intoned. "Let silence be your cage." As the drums struck their final beat, Ebony felt the air tighten in her throat. Her lips moved but no sound came. Panic flooded her chest, yet all she could do was gasp quietly. The people watched in awe as her melody vanished into nothingness. Mama Kira lifted the calabash she had prepared, holding it before the flame. "Let her voice rest here," she said, her tone low and final. "And may it never rise again." The wind died. The crowd dispersed. And in the eerie quiet that followed, even the birds forgot to sing. "You said." The night of the silencing was heavy with sorrow. Drums beat low in the distance as the people gathered around the temple courtyard, uncertain, frightened, yet obedient to the will of the priestess. Ebony knelt in the center, her wrists bound with vine rope, her eyes glistening with disbelief. The moon hung high above, casting silver light on her tear-streaked face. She wanted to sing, to fill the air with one last melody of forgiveness, but every time she opened her mouth, Mama Kira hissed, "Hold your tongue, girl, before it brings ruin upon us all." Inside the temple, incense burned thick and bitter. The walls shimmered with ancient carvings of the gods of voice and wind. In the center lay a large calabash, round, golden, and carved with sacred sigils. Mama Kira's voice trembled as she began the ritual, chanting old words that had not been spoken in centuries. The sound of her chants was harsh, angry, like rust scraping stone. Ebony's mother cried from the crowd, but the guards held her back. As the ritual deepened, Kira took a white cloth and pressed it over Ebony's mouth. The girl gasped but no sound came. A sudden wind rushed through the temple, carrying Ebony's song, invisible, golden, pure, into the air. The light spiraled, twisting into the calabash's opening. The vessel glowed with 1,000 hues before sealing itself with a sound like a heartbeat fading away. Ebony collapsed to the ground, clutching her throat in horror. She could breathe, but her voice, her gift, her soul, was gone. When she tried to scream, only silence answered. Her lips moved but no sound emerged. Panic filled her eyes as she reached for her mother, but even her sobs were soundless. The priestess raised the calabash high for all to see, declaring, "The spirit of song is caged. Nthora will know peace again." The people bowed, some in relief, others in quiet despair. The guards carried Ebony out like a broken doll, her steps weak, her face pale as dawnlight. In the days that followed, silence spread across the land. The morning birds refused to sing. Children who once hummed her tunes now whispered instead. The river's flow seemed slower, and the wind carried no melody. Even the festivals sounded hollow without her voice weaving through the crowd. The chiefs celebrated the return of order, but the villagers felt something sacred had been taken, not just from Ebony but from all of them. In her hut, Ebony spent her nights tracing songs in the air with her fingers, feeling vibrations that no one else could hear. Sometimes when the moonlight touched her skin, the faintest hum echoed within her chest, a reminder that her song still lived somewhere waiting. She dreamed of the calabash glowing inside the temple, trembling faintly, as if her voice within longed to be free. And far away, deep within that sacred place, the calabash indeed stirred. At midnight, its lid quivered. Inside, her captured song beat like a trapped bird, whispering against the walls, "I am not gone." The priestess never heard it, but the river did. The wind did. The earth itself trembled softly, knowing that silence cannot last forever. Weeks slipped by like shadows without dawn. The village of Nthora, once alive with laughter and melody, sank into a heavy stillness. The air itself seemed burdened by silence. Where Abony's songs once floated through the morning mist, there was now only the restless buzzing of flies and the low creak of trees swaying without rhythm. Even the wind, which had once danced to her tune, moved sluggishly as though mourning what was lost. Crops began to fail. The yam fields, which used to swell with abundance, now lay pale and cracked. The maize stalks bowed their heads as if grieving, their leaves brittle and gray. Farmers tried everything, sacrifices to the earth gods, extra prayers at dawn, but the soil stayed dry, refusing to yield. "The land has forgotten our voices," muttered one elder, "because we silenced the one it listened to most." Children fell ill with fevers that no herb could cure. The healer's chants no longer worked. Even Mama Kira's rituals failed to bring results. She stood before the sacred flame night after night, her voice growing hoarse, her power dimming. Yet her pride would not let her admit the truth, that the harmony of Nthora had depended not on her spells, but on the gentle magic of Abony's song. The hunters too suffered. They ventured deep into the forest but returned empty-handed, whispering that the animals had vanished, that even the rivers had gone quiet. "The spirits are hiding," one man said trembling. "They fear the silence." The chief listened with growing dread. His people were starving, the children coughing, the fields dying, and still the skies refused to rain. At last, the council of elders gathered beneath the great baobab tree. Wrinkles of regret lined their faces as they remembered the girl who once sang joy into their bones. "We were blind," said the oldest among them. "We let fear silence the child who carried light." Murmurs of guilt spread through the crowd. Mothers wept softly. The chief rose, his voice breaking. "Send word to Mama Kira. Tell her to undo what she has done." The messengers found the priestess in her temple, surrounded by fading candles and the faint hum of dying charms. When they fell to their knees and begged her to restore Abony's song, she glared down at them. "Do you not see?" she hissed. "This silence is holy. It is peace." Her voice disturbed the balance between mortals and spirits. "You should be grateful for the stillness." But even as she spoke, the temple groaned, wooden beams creaking as if the earth itself rejected her words. The calabash trembled on its altar, faintly glowing under the flicker of dying flame. The priestess tightened her grip on her staff, masking her fear. "Leave me," she ordered, though her voice wavered. Outside, the villagers began to whisper stories, that the river had stopped flowing for 3 days, that the moon no longer reflected on its surface. Mothers hushed their babies with trembling hands, saying, "Do not cry too loudly, or the priestess will steal your voice too." In her small hut, Abony watched it all unfold through the cracks in her window. She could not speak, but her heart still sang in silence. Each night, she pressed her palm to the earth, feeling its faint pulse beneath her. The world was in pain, and somehow it still called her name. Deep inside the temple, her imprisoned voice stirred once more, humming softly like a lullaby to the dying land. That night, after another long day of wordless sorrow, Abony lay on her mat beneath the pale glow of a sleepless moon. The air felt heavy as if the world itself held its breath. She closed her eyes, hoping for rest, but her spirit was restless, trembling beneath the silence forced upon her. Then, as her thoughts drifted between waking and dreams, a soft breeze entered her hut, gentle at first, then swirling into a warm current of light. The walls shimmered and vanished, replaced by an endless sky. Stars hung low and close, pulsing like hearts. From within the constellations emerged a tall, graceful figure woven of wind and radiance. Her eyes shone brighter than the moon, and her hair flowed like clouds touched by dawn. Abony fell to her knees, for she knew who stood before her. It was the Sky Mother, the ancient guardian said to have sung the first note that birthed all creation. "My child," the Sky Mother's voice was a melody that no mortal ear could hold, yet Abony understood every word. "Why do you weep?" Abony tried to answer, but no sound came. Only a rush of light poured from her lips, sparkling in the air like falling stars. The Sky Mother smiled, her expression both tender and sorrowful. Your voice is not gone, Ebony. It was never taken. It only sleeps, waiting for the courage that wakes it again. Tears welled in Ebony's eyes. She shook her head, pointing to her throat, to the emptiness that the calabash had stolen. But the Sky Mother raised her hand, and the stars around them began to hum, softly at first, then building into a harmony that felt alive. Ebony realized the sound came from within her own chest, echoing through the dream sky. Listen, said the Sky Mother. Your song does not live in your mouth, it lives in your spirit. And no mortal can imprison the spirit. Her voice grew like thunder wrapped in silk. The one who caged your gift has caged herself. But your time will come, child of light. When the dawn calls your name, follow it. The calabash will sing, and through it, so will you. The wind swirled faster, lifting Ebony gently from the ground. The stars moved with her, spiraling into patterns. A temple, a river, a glowing calabash at the center of both. The vision pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, each thump a whisper, find it. Free it. Then the Sky Mother reached out and touched Ebony's forehead. Your tears will carry light where darkness sleeps. Do not fear what was stolen, for nothing divine can ever be lost. Ebony felt warmth spread through her veins, as if sunlight had entered her blood. Her mute lips parted, and though no sound came out, the dream itself trembled with song. It was the melody of life, rebirth, and truth, the same tune the earth once heard when Ebony sang at the river's edge. When she awoke, dawn's first light crept through her window. Her cheeks were wet, but not with ordinary tears, they shimmered like drops of gold. She pressed a hand to her heart and felt a soft vibration, the pulse of her buried song calling from afar. Somewhere beyond the hills, deep within the temple walls, her voice stirred inside the calabash, humming faintly, waiting for her return. For the first time since her silence began, Ebony smiled. Though no words escaped her lips, the world around her seemed to exhale. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faintest echo, as if the Sky Mother herself whispered, Rise, daughter of song. The dawn awaits you. Before the first light of dawn, Ebony rose quietly from her mat. The village still slept under a sky of fading stars, but her heart pulsed with a rhythm that no silence could contain. The Sky Mother's words from her dream still echoed inside her. When the dawn calls your name, follow it. She wrapped herself in a simple cloth and stepped into the cool air, her bare feet touching the damp earth that seemed to hum beneath her toes. Each step felt guided, as though unseen hands smoothed the path before her. The forest loomed ahead, dark and ancient, yet Ebony felt no fear. The leaves rustled in greeting, branches swayed aside as if bowing to her passage. The world around her was alive, whispering, breathing, waiting. Even the crickets, whose songs usually filled the night, grew quiet as she passed, their silence deep and reverent. As she walked deeper into the woods, a faint glow began to gather between the trees, not from the sun but from something older. The river that wound near the temple shimmered faintly under the moon's retreat, and its waters rippled in rhythm with Ebony's heartbeat. The sound was soft, almost musical, as though the river remembered her voice and was echoing it back to her in secret. When the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, she reached the edge of the sacred grounds. There stood the Temple of Echoes, carved into stone and time, its entrance framed by vines and symbols long forgotten. It had once been a place of worship and song, but now it felt hollow, burdened by secrets. The great doors were slightly ajar, and from within came a low, trembling hum, like a breath caught in the chest of the world. Ebony paused at the threshold, her heart pounding. The air inside seemed to shift and ripple as if aware of her presence. For a moment she hesitated, the memory of Mama Kira's curse still heavy in her mind, but then a warm breeze brushed her cheek, carrying the faint scent of flowers that no longer bloomed in Thora. It was the Sky Mother's breath, urging her forward. She stepped inside. The temple was dim, lit only by shafts of dawnlight slipping through cracks in the ceiling. Dust motes drifted like tiny spirits, swirling around her as she moved deeper. Each step echoed softly, a sound that seemed both hers and not hers. On the far side of the chamber stood an altar carved of black stone, and at its center rested the calabash, small, round, and faintly glowing. Its surface was etched with curling marks that pulsed faintly with light, the symbols of silence that bound her voice. Ebony's breath caught. She felt its pull instantly, a vibration that matched the rhythm in her chest. Her fingers trembled as she reached out, but even before she touched it, she could feel her song pressing against its walls from the inside, desperate to be free. The air thickened, and the temple itself seemed to breathe with her, walls expanding and contracting like lungs filled with sound. The forest outside stirred in response. Birds that had long been silent began to shift in their nests. The trees swayed though there was no wind. Everything around her, the stones, the earth, the air, seemed to be waiting for what came next. Ebony knelt before the calabash. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sorrow but of recognition. She placed her hands gently upon its surface, feeling the warmth of her own spirit trapped within. The symbols glowed brighter, lines of gold weaving through the cracks. And though her lips made no sound, her heart whispered a single truth: I have come for my song. At that moment the light of dawn broke fully through the temple roof, spilling onto the calabash. It flickered once, then began to hum, softly at first, then louder, carrying the sound of a heartbeat that belonged to both the earth and Ebony herself. As Ebony pressed her hands against the smooth surface of the calabash, a tremor of warmth ran through her fingers. Her tears, shimmering with the first light of dawn, fell onto the sacred vessel, striking the carved sigils that had long imprisoned her song. The symbols glowed, writhing like serpents of fire, then began to smolder under the purity of her grief. Each drop of her sorrow pierced the darkness, unraveling the enchantments that had held her voice captive for so long. From deep within the temple, a sudden gust of wind stirred. The doors slammed open with a thunderous crash, and Mama Kira burst inside, her eyes wide with fury. "No!" she shouted, waving her hands in frantic incantation. Dark tendrils of magic twisted through the air, black and writhing, trying to reassert control over the calabash. "You shall not take what is mine," she screamed, her voice echoing with authority born of fear and envy. But Ebony stood firm, her heart beating in perfect rhythm with the pulse of the earth. She had no voice, yet her spirit resonated with a force stronger than any spell. The energy from her touch and tears collided with the priestess's dark magic. Sparks of light and shadow danced violently, swirling through the temple like a storm. The ground beneath them trembled, stone and dust shivering in response to the battle of wills. The calabash quivered violently in Ebony's hands. Tiny cracks spidered across its surface, golden light bleeding through the fissures. Mama Kira shrieked, but the sound was swallowed by the growing roar of energy. Ebony's palms burned, yet she did not let go. She felt the pulse of her song, faint at first, then surging like a river breaking through a dam. The calabash could hold it no longer. With a sudden, explosive shiver, the calabash cracked fully, splitting along its seam. Light poured out in a column that pierced the temple ceiling and spilled into the dawn outside. It was blinding yet warm, alive, and filled with the sound of her own voice, singing freely at last. The song rolled over the hills, weaving through the forest, the river, and the village beyond. It carried joy, sorrow, hope, and the power of truth, a melody that could not be silenced by fear or envy. Mama Kira stumbled back, her spells dissolving into sparks of nothingness. She fell to her knees, shielding her eyes from the brilliance. Her face, once haughty and proud, now betrayed terror and awe. The temple walls quaked, dust and pebbles tumbling to the floor, as if the earth itself responded to the liberation of a voice that had long been denied. Outside, the forest trembled with resonance. Birds lifted in flight, calling out in celebration. The river leapt and shimmered, reflecting the first full rays of sunlight. Even the flowers seemed to sway in rhythm with the song, petals opening to drink in the music. Villagers who had gathered at the edge of the temple watched in stunned silence as the hills echoed with a sound that belonged not to the air alone, but to the very spirit of life itself. Ebony fell to her knees, overwhelmed by the sheer force of freedom, yet her chest swelled with warmth. Her voice, once a fragile whisper trapped in a calabash, now roared with the fullness of her soul. Each note danced through the dawn like sunlight scattering across water, reclaiming the world from silence. The calabash lay in shards at her feet, still glowing faintly, humming as if it carried the echo of her song even in its brokenness. Ebony lifted her face to the sky, singing aloud for the first time in countless days. Her voice carried through every valley and forest, every village and riverbank, announcing a triumph of light over envy, of purity over oppression. From that moment on, the hills remembered, the rivers echoed, and Thora would never again be silent. As the first rays of sunlight crested over the hills, spilling gold across the village of Thora, a strange vibration rippled through the air. From the shattered calabash at the temple's center, a soft hum began, low and almost imperceptible at first. Then it grew, resonating with the heartbeat of the earth itself. The sound carried a weight of truth, a melody so pure that it seemed to brush against every soul in the village. Villagers stirring in their homes paused, eyes wide, as the haunting hymn reached their ears. Even those who had slept through months of silence felt a stirring deep in their chest, a memory of music that had once filled their lives. Mothers clutched their children to their breasts, elders bowed their heads in reverence, and young ones ran outside, letting the sound wrap around them like a warm embrace. The song seemed to lift from the Calabash and stretch into every corner of the valley, filling empty fields, quiet rivers, and homes that had forgotten joy. Mama Kira, the priestess who had tried to imprison the gift of song, staggered into the temple courtyard. She clutched her throat as the hymn washed over her, a torrent of pure, undeniable truth. Her chants, once powerful and commanding, faded into silence, swallowed by the overwhelming force of the melody. Panic and disbelief contorted her face, and she fell to her knees, powerless against a sound that was alive, radiant, and eternal. The Calabash continued to hum, each note a declaration that no magic born of envy could prevail against purity. Ebony stood before the glowing vessel, tears of light streaking her cheeks, and felt the song pulse through her chest, stronger than ever. Though her voice had been trapped, it had never been silenced in her spirit. Now, freed, it surged outward, filling the skies with music that carried the essence of dawn itself. Each note seemed to awaken the slumbering world. The wind swirled through the trees, the river leapt with sparkling energy, and the birds took to the air in jubilant chorus. Even the earth beneath their feet seemed to pulse in harmony with her rhythm. The fields, once withered and gray, began to quiver as if sensing life returning. Shoots of green pushed up through the soil, bending toward the light. The river, silent for weeks, rippled and danced, catching the sun in every curve. Flowers unfolded, releasing fragrances that had lain dormant, filling the air with scent and color. Villagers, watching in awe, realized that her song had not only restored sound but had healed the very fabric of their lives. Every note of Ebony's melody was a gift and a lesson, that truth, love, and generosity cannot be caged, that envy and fear may attempt to suppress them, but they will always rise. Even the youngest children, unable to fully understand the power they witnessed, smiled and laughed, joining instinctively in the chorus of life. The Calabash, now cracked and glowing with a soft internal light, continued its hymn, vibrating in tandem with Ebony's heart. It sang not just for the village but for the world, carrying the song across the hills, forests, and rivers beyond Thora. And as dawn stretched across the sky, the villagers understood that this was more than music, it was a promise. Ebony's voice, once imprisoned, had returned to heal the world, to remind them all that even in silence, the truth waits patiently, ready to sing again. In that moment the air itself seemed alive, inhaling and exhaling with the rhythm of her voice. Life had returned, and with it the certainty that light, love, and song are never truly lost. Ebony stood at the center of the village square, the golden light of morning spilling over her shoulders, illuminating the tears still glimmering on her cheeks. Her hands rested gently upon the cracked calabash, now pulsing with a gentle glow, humming in perfect harmony with the rhythm of her heart. From within it her voice soared, clear, strong, and radiant. But this time it carried more than melody. Each note was infused with memory, the sorrow of silence, the injustice of false accusations, the weight of envy, and the triumph of resilience. Every villager who heard it felt the truth of her story wash over them, not just in sound but in spirit. The crowd gathered silently, their faces uplifted, some blinking away tears as the melody seemed to speak directly to their souls. They had watched her suffer, had felt the oppressive quiet that had blanketed Thora for weeks, and now the village itself seemed to breathe again, every tree, every stream, every stone resonating with her song. Her voice told them of betrayal, yet without bitterness. It recounted fear, yet without despair. It spoke of pain, yet with compassion. It was as if the very essence of life, joy, sorrow, love, and forgiveness, had been woven into each note, and the song became a living tapestry of the village's heart. From the edge of the crowd, Mama Kira, the priestess, approached, her steps hesitant and trembling. Her eyes were wide with awe, and the power she had wielded for so long seemed to crumble at the resonance of Ebony's song. Each note struck chords in her soul she had long ignored: humility, guilt, and the undeniable truth that no mortal hand could chain divine grace. When Ebony's melody carried a refrain of forgiveness, the priestess fell to her knees, bowing before the girl whose voice she had sought to silence. Ebony lifted her gaze, meeting Mama Kira's eyes directly. Her voice rang with authority, though still gentle, carrying the weight of one who had endured the storm and emerged unbroken. "Mama Kira," she said, each word infused with the cadence of the calabash's hum, Your envy tried to still the song, but silence taught me something greater. Even pain has its rhythm. Even fear carries its own melody. And even betrayal can lead to understanding if we listen closely. Mama Kira wept openly, her hands trembling, her proud stance entirely gone. She could no longer summon her old spells or twist omens to her will. The power of Abony's voice, a blend of courage, compassion, and truth, surpassed any incantation she could muster. Overwhelmed, the priestess bowed her head and vanished from the village, retreating into exile to seek her own redemption. The villagers did not cheer, for this was not a victory born of vengeance. Instead, they stood in quiet reverence, knowing that the true triumph was the restoration of harmony, both in sound and in heart. Abony turned back to the calabash, now a relic of the struggle yet alive with memory. She lifted it carefully, feeling the pulse within, the echoes of every note she had once sung into it before her voice had been taken. She walked to the edge of the village, where children often played by the river. Kneeling, she set the calabash on the ground and invited them near. "Listen," she said, her hands tracing gentle patterns in the air to show rhythm. "This is the song of truth. Every note you sing carries the world with it. Sing not for pride but for what is honest in your hearts. Sing for love, for hope, and for life." The children, shy at first, pressed their ears to the calabash. Then, tentatively, they began to hum along, letting their voices merge with hers. The sound grew, a chorus of innocence and wonder, and soon the village square was alive with music once more. Birds returned, their songs harmonizing with the children. The river gurgled with renewed vigor, echoing the rhythms, and the trees swayed as if dancing to a long-forgotten lullaby. Abony's role became clear. She was no longer just a singer, but a keeper of the dawn song, a guide for the village to maintain harmony between voice and heart, sound and spirit. Every morning, she would gather the children, teaching them to feel the rhythm within themselves before attempting to reproduce it outside. She instructed them that music without honesty is hollow, and that every note carries the weight of intention. The village began to flourish in ways they could not have imagined. Crops thrived, rivers sparkled, and people's hearts healed alongside the land. Even the calabash, cracked but imbued with the memory of what it had endured, hummed softly each dawn. It became a symbol, a reminder that even when one is silenced, the truth cannot be contained forever. And each morning, as Abony's voice rose with the sun, the villagers learned once more that song is more than sound. It is a thread that weaves together courage, forgiveness, and the pulse of life itself. Abony looked out over Nthora, her eyes bright with joy and resolve. The sky above reflected the dawn, painting the world in hues of gold and rose. And as her voice lifted, mingling with the gentle hum of the calabash, she whispered a promise that resonated through every corner of the village and beyond. The song will never end, and it will always carry the truth of hearts brave enough to listen. You said. Generations had passed since the miraculous events at Nthora, yet the memory of Abony and her golden voice lived on, etched into the hearts and minds of all who heard the tale. The village had grown and changed. New homes dotted the hillsides, children ran along paths worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, and the temple where Abony had freed her song had crumbled into ruins, its stones softened by time and moss. Yet despite the passing years, every dawn brought with it a quiet reverence, for the people knew that the calabash, the vessel that had carried the imprisoned voice, had not truly been broken. Elders gathered each evening by the fire, their faces lined with age and experience, and told the story of Abony to wide-eyed children. They spoke of her gift, of how her voice could heal the sick, calm storms, and fill the hearts of even the most burdened villagers with joy. They recounted the envy of Mama Kira, the priestess whose jealousy had sought to bind the girl's power, and the trial in which Abony's voice had been sealed within a sacred calabash. With dramatic gestures, the elders mimed the moment the calabash cracked, allowing her voice to burst free like sunlight over the hills. Children shivered with excitement and awe, their imaginations painting vivid pictures of the dawn that had returned music to the land. But the elders always added the most important part: the calabash had never stopped singing. They explained that even as the temple crumbled and generations passed, the hum of the calabash could still be heard at the break of day. The sound was subtle, often masked by the first whispers of wind or the distant call of a bird, but those who approached with open hearts and quiet minds could hear it clearly. It was a song that carried memory, of the struggles Abony had endured, of the courage she had shown, and of the divine mercy that had allowed her voice to return. People who heard the calabash at dawn spoke of the experience in hushed tones. Some described it as a low vibration that seemed to resonate with their very bones, a melody that made the earth itself feel alive beneath their feet. Others said it echoed the rhythm of their own hearts, reminding them of the truths they held within. Even those who had never seen Ebony or lived through the events of that fateful day could feel the weight and beauty of the song, as though the calabash carried the essence of all voices born of honesty and courage. Travelers from distant lands sometimes visited Nthora, drawn by rumors of a miraculous calabash that sang at dawn. They would stand among the ruins, breathing in the mist that curled across the village, and wait. Some came expecting miracles, others merely curious to witness a legend. And more often than not, the calabash did not disappoint. Those who listened with sincerity reported hearing their own truths reflected back to them. Secrets they had hidden from others, fears they had never voiced, and dreams that had been long forgotten. Each note seemed to peel back the layers of pretense and pride, revealing the simple, unguarded essence of the listener's heart. Elders often reminded the children that this was the greatest lesson of all. The calabash sings not for fame, not for wealth, not for power, they said. It sings for truth. And truth, once born, can never be silenced. They told of Ebony's kindness, her courage, and her forgiveness, stressing that her power had never been in her voice alone, but in her ability to use it with honesty and love. Children would nod solemnly, imagining themselves walking to the temple ruins at dawn, hoping to hear the ancient hum and learn their own truths. As the village grew, traditions developed around the calabash's song. Families would rise early to greet the sun, whispering their thoughts and wishes into the mist, believing that the calabash would carry them to the heavens. Newlyweds would approach the ruins, letting the morning hum envelop them, symbolizing the beginning of a life built on trust and openness. Young drummers would place their hands gently upon the stones, feeling the faint vibrations and learning that music born of truth had a life beyond mere rhythm, that it could teach, heal, and guide. Even the land itself seemed to remember. Trees would sway gently in time with the song, rivers would glisten as if reflecting the calabash's melody, and animals would pause to listen, their ears attuned to something humans often forgot, that every sound, every note, and every heartbeat was part of a grander harmony. On certain mornings, the mist would rise thick over the village, cloaking everything in silver, and it was during these times that the calabash's hum was strongest. The elders taught that this was the moment to truly listen, for it was then that one could hear not only the voice of Ebony but also the echoes of all who had lived honestly and bravely. Over time, the legend of Ebony became inseparable from the identity of Nthora itself. Songs were composed in her honor, incorporating melodies said to mimic the calabash's dawn hymn. Stories of the priestess's envy were passed down, not to shame, but to warn against the dangers of jealousy and the importance of humility. Children learned that the power of a voice lay not merely in its beauty, but in its connection to truth and the courage to share it. And through it all, the calabash continued to sing, its notes threading through the fabric of daily life, a reminder that the past is never truly gone and that every act of honesty reverberates through time. Pilgrims and villagers alike came to the ruins to hear the hum, often staying in silence for hours. Some spoke softly afterward, saying that they felt a guidance they could not articulate, a gentle but firm reminder to live with integrity, compassion, and love. Lovers held hands as they listened, knowing that the calabash's voice carried the blessing of sincerity. Parents brought their children, hoping they would grow to understand that true power is not in domination or fear, but in authenticity and kindness. And so, generations after Ebony's time, the village of Nthora lived in harmony with the lessons of the calabash. Her story was recounted not only for entertainment but as a moral compass, a guide for living in a world that could so easily be clouded by greed, envy, and deceit. The temple ruins, though worn by centuries, became sacred in memory, a place where one could stand quietly in the dawn mist, listen with an open heart, and hear a voice that carried across ages, singing truth into the hearts of all who would listen. The elders' final words to every child and visitor were always the same: listen closely. The calabash still sings. Hear it and you will hear your own heart. Let its song remind you that voices born of truth can never be silenced. They become the morning that sings, the light that awakens all who are willing to hear. And in every dawn thereafter, as the mist curled across the village, soft and radiant, the hum of the calabash rose once more, carrying Ebony's legacy into the world. Its song echoed through hills, rivers, and forests, reminding every soul that truth, courage, and love are eternal, and that no force, not fear, not envy, not time itself, can ever truly still a voice born from the heart.